Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Darian Scott, Director of Economic Inclusion for the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce. Our quarterly DEI forums are to educate us all on the importance of inclusion and equity in our community and workplace. I want to thank our sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, for supporting us in this work. Towards the end, there will be a Q&A section, session, so please put your questions in the Q&A so we can get those questions to our speaker. There will be a lot of information packed into this 1 hour, so please stay focused and feel free to take notes. Our speaker today, you may know her from Diversify 2020, which was our very first virtual major event during the COVID-19 pandemic. Turned out to be wildly successful, which was great. So we brought her back in. She is also the founder of CEO Turning Point Leadership Group, LLC, an innovative performance improvement company that specializes in diversity and inclusion, leadership development, and relationship management. She has worked in the US and abroad, developing and delivering interventions for clients of all sizes, disciplines, and individuals, from individuals to Fortune 500 companies. So I want to say thank you for coming back again, Dr. Linda Wiley.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Darian. I appreciate that introduction. And I'm going to jump right in, get us started. I want to thank you and everyone at the Chamber for the invitation to come and be with your audience today. And I want to thank all of your members for being here. I know there are other things that you could be doing right now, but you've chosen to spend time with me, and I appreciate that. And of course, thank you again to your sponsor. My friend Ron Harris is always on the front line doing things when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thanks for all of that. Before we get started, let me just remind us of all of the things that have been going on in our nation in the last year or so. So we've had the Black Lives Matter protests. We've been dealing with this pandemic situation. We've had some contentious elections. And we're still in the aftermath of some of the things that happened in the last administration. If nothing else convinces you that inclusion is important, then just take a look at the news. I'm a firm believer that if inclusion had a higher priority in this country, then some of the things that have been taking place in the last year or so would not have taken place. But it's not just a matter of we need to be more inclusive because it's the right thing to do or morally correct or any of those things. Inclusion is profitable. Inclusion is profitable. The numbers don't lie. So let's talk about that. I want to ask you a few questions. So let's take a poll. In a moment on your screen, you're going to see 4 questions, and I want you to answer them true or false. It's anonymous, so just go ahead, put your answers in. And once we get everybody's answers, then we'll come back and let you know what the correct answer should be. Give you just another minute or two. Yeah, when we may not get 100% participation, but once we get maybe into the 90s, let's just go ahead and show the results of that poll, please. All right, very good. Thank you so much. So the first one, a higher representation of women in C-suite level positions results in 34% greater returns to shareholders. 94% of you thought that was true, 6% said false. And actually that is a true statement. This question was coming from a survey done by Fast Company. Fast Company was responsible for number 2 as well. Organizations with above average gender diversity and levels of employee engagement outperform companies with below average diversity and engagement by 46 to 58%. Got that one correct. That one definitely is true. And what's so surprising is we know that. We know that more than 50% on average is based on diversity and inclusion, but yet we still have companies that aren't near 50% when it comes to diversity. Number 3, this one was from Harvard Business Review. Companies with higher than average diversity had 19% higher innovation revenues. Again, you all got this one correct. This is definitely true. We know that the more diverse an organization is, there's a direct correlation to how innovative they are. And we'll get into that a little bit in my presentation. And then the last one, companies in the top quartile for racial ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to surpass peers. That one actually is true, and that comes from our friends at McKinsey & Company. So again, just wanted to get us started off with some numbers. These are numbers that you may have seen before, and even if you didn't know the exact percentages, you have a general feeling of the fact that yes, the more diverse an organization is, the more profitable it is as well. So thank you for participating. Now, why look at the numbers? Well, for one thing, data helps us. Data helps you make better decisions. When you have information at your fingertips, you utilize that information. So for example, let's say something out of common everyday life. Data in terms of how much money is in your bank account will help you to make a decision about what purchases you can make. You don't want to make purchases that can't be supported by that bank account. So there are consequences to that if you make the wrong decision. Data helps you make better decisions. It helps you solve problems, because when we bring together different ideas and perspectives and experiences, we find that there's more creativity. And if there's something that doesn't fit a certain group, we have to go back to that proverbial drawing board and come up with another response. It helps us understand performance. When someone is doing extremely well or not, we want to get behind it and understand why. What can we do to help make that situation better? In the same way, it helps us improve processes, and it helps us understand our consumers. What do customers like or dislike? What motivates them? What patterns can we see in their buying behavior? All of those things help us when it comes to profitability and increasing sales. So data helps us in that respect. So let's look at some numbers. Now, little known company, IBM, I think you may have heard of them. Back in 1998, IBM had revenues of $10 million. As a result of implementing a diversity task force initiative, IBM grew its female executive ranks by 370%, its ethnic minority executive ranks by 233%, and the number of self-identified gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender executives by 733%. So IBM was all about increasing the diversity. They knew early on that there was a strong correlation between market share and diverse employees. They knew that that would lead to increased sales, increased productivity, increased profitability. So they went all out, and you can see the extent by those percentages. And then just 3 short years later, in 2001, the organization's activities accounted for more than $300 million in revenue. So in 3 years, they went from 10 million in revenue to 300 million in revenue because of diversity and inclusion. And actually, I'm proud to say that at that point in time, between that 3-year period, I was engaged by IBM. Initially, I was a consultant to IBM, and at one point they had asked me to come in and be an employee leading some of the initiatives with respect to the training and so forth. So I spent a couple of years, I think about 2 years at IBM, and was able to contribute in some way to this growth that took place. Now you might be saying, okay, well, that's great for a company as big as IBM, but our firm is not that large. So let's look at some smaller firms. Let's look at law firms. Highly diverse law firms report on average much higher profits per partner and revenue per lawyer than the rest of the AmLaw 200 firms. Even controlling for hours, location, and firm size, a firm that was ranked in the top quarter in the diversity rankings will generate more than $100,000 of additional profit per partner than a peer that has all of the same qualifications, same size, same city, same hours, etc. So being a small firm myself, I don't know about you, but I could appreciate an additional $100,000 of profit, not revenue, but profit. let's let that marinate for a minute. And then last but not least, let me show you Sodexo. Sodexo, as many of you know, is the French food services and facilities management company. So with women currently comprising half of their board, 32% of senior leaders, and close to 50% of its total workforce. Again, let's just stop there for a minute and think about that. How many of you can actually say that women comprise half of your board, or that 32% of your senior leaders are female, or that close to 50% of your workforce is female? Sodexo is among the most gender diverse companies in its industry and its home country. It is notably almost among the most successful financially it is notably also among the most successful financially within the McKinsey data set, with value creation that is 13% above the industry average. So you can see the power and get to understand why we say inclusion is profitable. So the opposite of that is true. Less diversity, less profit. Companies in the fourth quartile on both gender and ethnic diversity are more likely to underperform their industry peers financially. Not average, but underperform. And specifically, they are 29% more likely than the other three quartiles to underperform on profitability. Now, it's important to note that just because you have diversity doesn't mean you're going to be more profitable. That's why we're calling this inclusion is profitable, because you have to bring in the people and give them a voice. You have to make them feel included. They have to be valued and welcomed and respected. They need to be supported. There has to be a sense of belonging. There needs to be a trust basis established. All of these things that go along with inclusion need to take place. Diversity in and of itself, we've learned, it's a step in the right direction, but if people don't feel included, you will not get these kinds of results. So as an example of that, McKinsey back in 2018, I think it was, did a survey where they wanted to look at microaggressions. And remember, microaggressions are those comments, actions, behaviors, all of those things that subtly and indirectly send prejudiced messages to marginalized groups. They have with them this attitude of prejudice, and it usually is directed at women and people of color. So in this particular instance, the study was looking at the difference between microaggressions expressed towards women versus those that were expressed towards men. The first thing they asked was, they wanted to know how many of these employees, these people that were being surveyed, having your judgment questioned in your area of expertise. Well, 27% of the men said, yes, they had experienced having their expertise questioned. Some people may experience that at any point in time. When they looked at the women, however, 36% of all women said that they had had their judgment questioned in their area of expertise. So women are questioned more than men, even when you're brought in as a known expert. That's a microaggression. And when we break it down further and look at the ethnicities of women and even the sexual orientation of women, we can see that the numbers vary across white women, Asian women, Latinas, Black women, and lesbian women. But Black women, it was the highest at 40%. So let's go to the next question. During the normal course of business, needing to provide more evidence of your competence than others do. The men said 16% of them had experienced that, but it was almost double for the women at 31%. And again, varying numbers depending on your ethnic background. 36% for Asian women, 42% for Black women. Being addressed in a less than professional way. 16% of the men, again, said yes, they had been addressed in a less than professional way. 26% of women said it happened to them. And it was 26% for white women, 21% for Asian women, 23% for Latin women, 26% for Black women, 23% for lesbian women. And the last one that I'll show you is being mistaken for someone at a much lower level. It happened 10% of the time for men, double that for women. And again, higher for some groups than others. Now, when we look at this, these are microaggressions. These are things that directly impact how included people feel in the workplace. So the number or the column that stands out the most is that column for Black women. If you look at the column for Black women, you can see that it is always higher or at best equal in this particular situation of 26%, and in this one at 22%. But it's the highest number there is in every single category. And the way this sort of plays out in the workplace. So here's an example that I borrowed from Lean In. And Lean In is the organization started by Sheryl Sandberg after she wrote the book. So here we are with two women of color looking at a sign at a conference. And the sign says, if you want the gender diversity conference, you go to the left for 1A. If you want the racial diversity conference, you go to the right for 1B. And so the women are confused. They're like, which one is for us? This is very common, and we often overlook this whole concept of intersectionality, recognizing that we are more than just one thing. But if we're doing gender diversity, then okay, women need to go, but women of color are often left out of that because we experience other microaggressions and some aggressions that aren't very micro in the workplace. So we also need to understand the racial diversity piece. If women of color just go to the racial diversity piece, then yes, we may learn how to navigate our way and understand some of what goes on between people of color and whites, but then we still have that issue of being women, and that's not addressed. So for certain groups, when we're talking gender and equity and racial equity, certain groups have this double bind situation where they're caught in the middle because they represent more than one marginalized group. We need to get to a place where we can peel back the layers to understand who that unique person is and address those situations. And intersectionality is one of the things that will help us do that. I'm going to start promoting the term culture add. And the reason I decided to do this is because we often talk about culture fit. And when we're interviewing people or considering people to come into the organization, we look at it, to me, almost as the glass is half empty. We look at it and sometimes we say, they're not a real good fit for the culture of this organization. Well, what if we were to look at it as the glass being half full? And what if we would say, based on some of the unique qualities that their diversity lends to the equation, what are they adding to our culture? What are they bringing in terms of experience or perspective that we don't currently have? What is the culture add? And that's going to take a mind shift, a paradigm shift, but we're working on it. All right, so inclusion is profitable. I showed you the numbers. Let's talk about some of the other benefits. Inclusive organizations have 8 benefits, at least 8, that non-inclusive organizations don't have. One of those would be higher job satisfaction. When employees come to work and they feel like I belong here, I'm a valued part of the team, my contributions are recognized, people are including me in conversations and in promotional opportunities, they are more satisfied with the job. And so in a related way, turnover is lower. Why would they go anyplace else? You also get more productivity out of employees who feel included. Because again, it's tied to employee morale. And when I feel good about the job I'm doing and the contribution that I'm making, then I'm more willing to contribute and I'm in a much better mood, I'm more engaged, and there's more teamwork and collaboration that's taking place. Another benefit of an inclusive organization is that there's improved creativity and innovation. And there are studies that have been done in these areas as well. And that is related to the problem solving. We have to come up with different ways of problem solving, and different people will see the problem from different perspectives. So we're being more creative with respect to our solutions. New innovations are born out because something that doesn't fit the problem that was in front of us might be something we had not thought about. And of course, we know product examples where that's happened, where what was deemed as a mistake in one sense turned out later to be something that was quite an innovation. And of course, my favorite of all of those is the Post-it note. It was a mistake with the glue. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. And years later, that engineer went back and looked through files and came up and decided it would work well for Post-it notes. And I venture to say that every office across America has Post-it notes. So you can turn something that looks like a mistake into something that's more innovative and creative. It increases organizational flexibility, and you have sharper employees. People learn from mistakes, people learn from near misses, people learn from the experiences and the knowledge and the backgrounds of other individuals. So by having an inclusive organization, These 8 benefits manifest themselves, and they all point towards profitability. You can be more productive, and if the money is being managed well, you'll be profitable as well. But in order to have an inclusive organization, you need to first have inclusive leadership in that organization. So I've given you some data from McKinsey, one of the heavy hitters in this space, and another firm that does a lot of work in terms of organizational behavior would be our friends at Deloitte. So let's look at the characteristics of inclusive leaders. Based on this Deloitte model, they say that there are 6 signature traits. Now, this doesn't mean that inclusive leaders only have these 6 things. For me, this is sort of like the analogy, say, of a car. What does a car need? Well, it needs an engine, it needs a transmission, it needs something to steer with, it needs a seat, it needs some tires. Many of the things that we have in our cars, you know, our MP3 players, or I'm sorry, MP4 players, or you know, if it's not the MP3, it might be a CD player, if you still have CD player in your car, or the sunroof, the moon roof, the heat and air. All of those things are luxury things that are good to have, but they're not the signature things that makes a car run. So these 6 things are the signature things of an inclusive leader. We're going to go into each one in a little bit of detail, but just let me give you an introduction of them. So start at the bottom left with commitment. Commitment is one because staying the course is hard. This is not an easy task. I have been doing work in this field for over 20 years, and it's not easy. There's some days you question yourself with, why am I doing this? Why am I knocking my head against the wall for a group of people that doesn't see it, doesn't want to see it, will never change? You've got to be committed. This is a long game, not a short game. You have to be looking forward to, what am I doing for future generations? How is my small contribution going to make the world a better place? So commitment is key. Courage is key, because talking about imperfections involves personal risk-taking. I can tell you stories from 20 years ago when I would drive into certain parts of the country to deliver diversity and inclusion training, and was informed by leaders in the organization that I really needed to be out of that city before it got to be dark. These are the kinds of things that you might have to deal with behind the scenes when you're committed. You have to deal with, if I am too out front and supportive of a certain group of people, am I going to get backlash from others in the organization? So it takes courage to be an inclusive leader. It takes what they call cognizance. In other words, this is where a lot of the unconscious bias stuff comes in. We have to do unconscious bias training because you don't know what you don't know. And bias is a leader's Achilles heel. When you are biased in leadership, nothing is equal. And so you're not going to be retaining people. You won't be effective at recruiting people. The development's going to be off. The productivity is going to be off. You have to be aware or cognizant of what your biases are. Curiosity is the next one, because different ideas and experiences enable growth. So ask questions, do a lot of reading, watch documentaries, get to know people not like you, join employee resource groups that don't fit your personal attributes. Be curious. You have to have a certain level of cultural intelligence, and curiosity helps with that. You have to identify people who can be your cultural informants, people who are from a totally different background that you can trust. When you ask them questions, they'll give you the straight up answer that you're looking for. So if you're heterosexual and you're having a difficult time processing things around the LGBTQ community, maybe you're not truly understanding, what does it mean to be gender fluid? And how are we supposed to handle certain situations with trans individuals in our workplace? Find someone that's part of that community that you can trust and ask them questions, because not everyone sees the world through the same cultural frame. We see the world as we are, not as it is. And then the last one is collaboration, which we know there are tons of studies that show how collaboration and teamwork all help with productivity and profitability. So collaboration is one of their 6 signature traits, because a diverse thinking team is greater than the sum of its parts. So let's look at each one of these on an individual basis, because you may be saying, okay, I get it with respect to commitment, but what is it exactly that I should be doing? So here are some points to help you with that. One is allocating resources and holding yourself accountable for improving diversity and inclusion. You can be an inclusive leader, even if your organization isn't quite there yet. You can get it started. What you need to do is hold yourself accountable. Treat all team members with fairness and respect. Remember, this is about equity, not equality. They are not the same thing. And that is really the topic for another presentation. But just imagine, if you will, in your head, you're at an apple orchard and there are people of different heights who need to pick apples. Well, shorter people will have an opportunity to pick the apples that maybe are on the lower branches of the tree, but they don't have the opportunity to pick the higher fruit. So if you give a ladder to the shorter folks, they can climb the ladder and they have equal opportunity to pick some of the apples that are at the top of the tree. So now, in order to give them equal opportunity, in order to make things equitable, we have to make them of about equal height. And that's where the ladder comes in. We're treating people equitably. We're giving them what they need to be equal in the game. And as I said, we can go a lot further into that, but that's all that I really have time to explain right now. But make sure that equitable is part of your equation. Understanding what makes individuals unique and ensuring they feel connected to the team. Again, for me, that's part of that culture add. What do you bring that no one else is bringing? And in fact, I'm starting to advise potential candidates. When you're going in for an interview, think about it as culture add. What are they lacking that you bring to the team? And working through obstacles and adapting to meet the needs of others. And really, I mean, isn't that the definition of leadership? A leader's job basically is to identify and remove the barriers that get in the way of people doing what you've hired them to do, and providing the resources that enable them to get the job done effectively and efficiently. So working through obstacles and adapting to meet the needs of others, those things show commitment. Some of the things that show courage. If you want to be a more courageous, inclusive leader, ask for feedback. Many of us shy away from it. We don't really want to know what our weaknesses are. And some of us deny that they're weaknesses, or we try to explain them away. What you need to do is, perhaps if you're not already in your organization doing the 360-degree type of feedback, get that going even for yourself. You can ask your peers, your manager, your manager's manager, and some of the people that work on your team under your leadership. You can ask them questions about how you're doing. And if there's a good relationship and there's trust in the organization, they'll provide you with some feedback. You have to be humble, showing humility and admitting when you make a mistake, and not just admitting it, but apologizing for it. And not just apologizing for it, but saying what you will do to keep that from happening again in the future. And challenge the status quo. Call out bias when you see it. Now, if you're not familiar with any of the works of Ibram Kendi, and his first name is I-B-R-A-M, his last name is K-E-N-D-I. Ibram Kendi has written a lot with respect to racism and anti-racism. And the reason I'm bringing this up is he actually has three categories. There's the racist, the non-racist, and the anti-racist. Many people think that they are anti-racist when they are not that far along on the continuum. They're more non-racist. Now, we need non-racists as well. So people who are non-racist, thank you very much for that position. However, the non-racist is the person who they don't do anything that would be considered racially discriminating, but they don't call it out when they see other people do it. They don't sign the petition. They don't go for the march. They don't change the policies. They don't challenge people's opinions. They don't speak up and say, you know, that really is kind of a microaggression. We need to get more people moving from that non-racist position into the anti-racist position, the people who are advocates for change. Takes courage. Cognizance, developing an understanding of different kinds of personal biases, such as implicit stereotypes, groupthink, and confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is important because many times when we have a preconceived notion about people, we will look for evidence to confirm or to prove that that notion is right. We look for things to say, aha, I told you that they, fill in the blanks on whatever it was. Now, they might be doing the same thing that every other group is doing, but we're not looking for it in other groups. We're looking for it in that group because we believe that that's an attribute that belongs to that particular group. It's learning to self-regulate and take corrective steps to ensure fair play, and establishing transparent policies for making merit-based decisions. And I know we think we have merit-based decisions, and we might, but it's the practice of those that sometimes get in the way. Are we being fair? Are we treating people with respect? Is there equity as well as equality? How are we actually implementing the merits that we put in place when it comes to things like promotions, rewards, task allocations, etc.? There's data that shows that some people in the organization get opportunities based on potential. Other people get opportunities based on proven track record. That happens a lot across the gender divide. Well, there'll be a man who maybe doesn't have the experience. And again, please keep in mind, I'm talking in general terms. Anything that I say about groups of people does not apply to everyone in that group. But in general, there's data to suggest that in many instances, men are given opportunities based on potential. We know what a great job he did over there, so we think he'll come over here and do a great job here. No, he doesn't have a proven track record in that area, but he's got all of these attributes that let me know he'll be successful. Women, on the other hand, many times it comes from what seemingly is a paternalistic or protective stance, where we say, well, she doesn't have a proven track record and we don't want to put her in a position to fail. So let's give her another year. Let's send her to some training. Let's put her in leadership development, all of these other things. We overlook the potential and look for the proven track record. We've got to start being more equitable in some of our practices, and it takes cognizance to do that. Curiosity. Show a desire for continuous learning and improvement. Okay, so there's no formal diversity training in your organization. Read a book, join a group on LinkedIn, find a course that's publicly offered, or speak up at a meeting and ask that that process be started in the organization. Accept your own limitations and seek diverse perspectives. None of us have arrived. None of us have arrived. So diversity was the topic of my doctoral dissertation, and I've been working in the field internally in organizations as well as externally as a consultant my entire professional career, and I still have aha moments. You have been focused on other things, whatever your particular calling is in life and whatever your chosen career is. You haven't been spending all of your time in this field. So if I can still have aha moments, clearly you have not arrived. In fact, in psychology, we say if you have a brain, you have bias. I mean, it's just that simple because the brain is wired in that way. But you have to be willing to accept your limitations and know that you don't have all the answers. And maybe someone else's experience is valid. Don't question people on the validity of what they feel or what they have experienced. And we have to cope with ambiguity and accept that there are some things that are uncertain. Uncertainty is inevitable. I find that people who need to have predictable outcomes struggle in this space a little more than others, because this is not a space that's based on predictability. We're dealing with people, and yes, we can, to some extent, predict behaviors, but we're not always going to know how B is going to turn out based on A. There's not always a direct causality. Sometimes it takes us through 2 or 3 other things, and only those who are curious are going to find the path to get them where they're trying to go. Another one is cultural intelligence. So how do you develop cultural intelligence? Well, you have to value cultural differences and seek opportunities to learn about other cultures. Develop an awareness of how cultural stereotypes can influence expectations, and they do. Accept that people might need to change their behavior to navigate cross-cultural interactions. So sometimes it really does require people to behave differently. And I know sometimes in resistance, people want to say, well, I can't tell people how to behave. I can't tell them how to think, but we do it all the time. We have code of conduct, we have dress codes, we have a mission, we have value statements, we have all types of things that say to people, if you want to work here and be successful, these are the rules of the game. So we can add that to this as well. You know, what is it that we need to do to become a more culturally intelligent organization? And last but not least, we have collaboration. Putting together diverse teams and avoiding the appearance of favoritism among members. Sometimes when we get into leadership positions, we just need to get the job done, and we need to get it done fast and right. So we have our go-to people. And quite often we want to give the job to the go-to people because we know from past experience, they will get the job done fast and they will get the job done right. But when you do that, You're not giving your go-to people a break, so they're going to get burned out. And you're not fully developing others who are standing by saying, put me in, coach, put me in, I'm ready. They're waiting to be utilized. They're waiting to show you their skills and abilities, and they're not getting that opportunity. So when you think about diverse teams, don't just think about them from the standpoint of race and gender. Those are very important. And we have more data on race and gender than we do on other dimensions of diversity. However, think about people who have differing levels of education, people who have differing seniority within the organization. What age groups are they? Think about sexual orientation. Think about so many different things. It might seem like extra work, but the more you do the work up front, the better the product. It's like the thing of measure twice, cut once. Yeah, you have to do more upfront, but the product comes out better. And building trust. Some of you may have heard me speak on trust, the D&I sustainability factor. In an organization where there is no trust, you will not sustain your diversity and inclusion results. So you have to build trust so that everyone feels comfortable speaking up. And empowering teams to handle difficult situations and being ready to help address conflict if needed. Diversity may lead to conflict. It might. Even think about your home life, where everyone knows everyone and loves everyone, but there's still conflict that arises because we think about things differently. We have different desires. We approach things differently, but we're patient with the people we love. You don't have to love the people at work. That's not what I'm suggesting, though it would be nice. My faith tells me that I'm to love everybody, but you do as you're led. You have to come to work and act collaboratively with people, regardless of how you might feel about them. So those are the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. And to the extent that your leaders possess these traits, you can become more of an inclusive organization. Next question might be, okay, so how do we get started? Good information, but what do I need to do? Give you a couple of tips, and then I'll be ready to take whatever questions or comments you have. So in terms of getting started, I talked to you in the beginning about the importance of data. So collect data, and not just the numbers, but collect stories as well. Get the qualitative data. And when people come to you and they're sharing experiences or feelings, just accept it. Treat it as true. If you have not walked in their shoes, you don't have the right to say whether they have or have not experienced that. So here's an example. It's a little rough to hear, but bear with me. Let's say you have a school-aged child and you send your child to school, and your child comes home one day and says, my teacher grabbed me and it made me feel uncomfortable. You're going to ask a few more questions, but I'm sure that you're going up to that school. Tomorrow morning when the doors open, you will be there because you want to see that teacher. You want to know who touched my child in such a way. And I'm just saying they could have grabbed him by the arm. It could have been anything, but who touched my child in such a way that was inappropriate and made my child feel uncomfortable? You're not going to say to your child, oh, you probably read it the wrong way. Oh, Mr. Smith is a great pillar in our neighborhood. We know them. They go to our church. I think you're looking at that situation wrong. You're not going to say, well, nobody else has ever complained. You know, your brothers and sisters had Mr. Smith and they never said Mr. Smith grabbed them the wrong way. You're not going to go through that. But when one of your employees comes to you and says that they think they're being discriminated against or treated unfairly because of their age, their skin color, or whatever the case might be, you need to take it with the same veracity that you would go after Mr. Smith. And you need to not assume that, oh, they're reading it the wrong way. And are you sure that's what happened? Because Mr. Smith has worked here for so many years, that doesn't sound like how he would have behaved. So in addition to collecting data, we need to establish some goals. And I'm saying goals, I'm not saying quotas. Those of you who are in HR know that quotas are illegal. All of you, actually, if you're in leadership in any way, management should know. And we're not talking about quotas. We're talking about goals. We have goals for everything. Even if you're a solopreneur, you might say, okay, I've got 10 clients this year. I want to increase that by 50% next year. That's a goal. So you might say, I've got 2 women on my team this year. I want to increase that by 50% next year. It's just a target to shoot for. We do it with everything, performance, etc. So let's have goals so that we have a path and we know where we're going. And once you have some goals established, you need to develop a plan. And that plan should cover things like how and where are we going to recruit? How are we going to interview in that recruiting process? Who's going to be part of the interview panel? What questions will we ask? Are we asking the same questions of everyone, and are we scoring the same way for everyone? There's so much that goes into recruiting. And with retention, what's working, what's not working? Why are people leaving? Are they satisfied with the job? Are they being productive? Are they being challenged? What's going on with retention? And of course, development. If people don't feel like they're being developed for the next level and the next level and the next level, it may lead to some turnover. And once you have a plan, you need to implement that plan. And you're incrementally putting these steps in place. You want to start with some of the easy, low-hanging fruit to start building the trust and let people see that, yes, they're serious about this. So you implement the plan, and then you evaluate progress, which is nothing more than collecting data, and the cycle continues. So these are some of the ways that you can get started to become a more inclusive organization. Henry Ford told us coming together is a beginning. And I'm sure many of you have started that process, coming together. You've been increasing your diversity. You're here learning and picking up more information. You're taking advantage of these DEI forums, and you're keeping it together. Keeping together is progress. That's good. Working together is success. So I'm sharing all of this with you because, as I said, I'm a firm believer. Inclusion is profitable. I've shown you some numbers, and the numbers don't lie. So I thank you so much for your time and attention. And Darian, I will turn it over to you. See if anyone has any questions for me.
Yeah, we actually do have a couple of questions. Well, one of the questions, you spoke on it a little bit, kind of some examples, but who is getting it right? Like what organizations or any that you know of, who is getting it right? And like who is that role model of an organization that organizations need to look at and be like, that's what I'm shooting to be?
Okay, so what I would say is, good question. What I would say is, in addition to the examples that I've shown you, the at this stage where we are, there aren't a lot of companies that just have it right. IBM is still holding strong pretty well. There are companies that have been working at this, mostly the larger ones, like, Delta Airlines has been working. And of course, you're going to hear things that come up in the news that'll make you feel like, well, I thought they were doing this well. Nobody has it 100%, but Delta is doing a good job at this. Again, from what I've seen, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee is doing a good job at this. For me, many of the companies that are doing a good job are the ones that are now asking questions. Just because somebody comes out with a statement, like many companies did after George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor was murdered, people came out with statements saying, what they support, but nobody wants to read rhetoric. We want to see it. We want to see actions. So if you're asking questions, if you're holding focus groups, if you are bringing in people to do the training, if you're developing a strategic plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you're an organization that's doing it right.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat, and it speaks on organizations claiming to not be able to find qualified, diverse talent. How should an organization address that, and what are some good resources?
Another good question, and we hear that a lot. So most of that is a sourcing issue. Where are you looking for the talent? And are the criteria the same? Are you trying to hold people to a standard that really, don't expect somebody to come in with a Ph.D. if all they really need is a bachelor's degree? What are the qualifications? Are you holding the same qualifications across the board, and where are you looking? Many times we want to go to, the top-notch Ivy League schools. Well, Malcolm Gladwell told us in one of his books how the big fish in the small ponds actually outproduce the small fish in the big pond. So in other words, you would do better to get that #1 student from an HBCU as opposed to the 100th student or the 50th place student out of a Stanford University. And so we want to make sure that we're looking places where people go. So I'm getting known now for this particular analogy, and I still don't know if it's correct or not. So if you fish, forgive me. But I always talk about, it's like fishing. If you go to fish and there are equal percentages of trout and bass and carp, and I don't know if trout and bass and carp all exist in the same type of water. That's where I may be off base, but that's okay. So in my lake, I have trout and bass the carp? Well, when I drop my net, if there are equal percentages of those three type of fish, then theoretically I should pull up roughly equal percentages of those type of fish in my net. And if I don't, there's something wrong with the net. Maybe the holes are of a size that the smaller trout slip through and the bass stay in. Or maybe I'm dropping it in a portion of the lake where only the carp are, and you don't see as many of the bass or the trout, whatever the case might be. But if you've got equal percentages, when you drop that net, you should come up with equal percentages. So what's happening is we're going to places where we don't have equal percentages. We're going to schools that are largely white when it comes to the student population, and we're saying we can't find students of color. Go to the schools where the students of color are. You've got to break that mindset that says that some of the schools that are heavily populated with people of color or some of the HBCUs are not schools that are of good quality. You got to break that mindset. You can find good students anywhere. You've got to go to some of the organizations, professional organizations, start building pipelines, go to doing programs. You know, one of my clients, we did something with Junior Achievement of Georgia. Start doing programs in the lower levels and start building your pipeline. But the main thing is, where are you looking? Look on boards that are on the internet, look at some of the job boards where people are posting, look for places that are attracting, look for alumni associations of HBCUs. You have to go to where the people are. There's no such thing as they're not out there. It's like, are you diligently looking? Where are you looking? And when you find them and interview them, are you one of the folks that says they're not a culture fit? Change your mindset. They're adding something that you don't have. You don't want everyone to be a culture fit, because then you don't have the diversity, which leads to the creativity, the innovation, all those other things. So yeah, it's just a matter of, where are you looking? Start doing some different sourcing. There's someone on my team that specializes in sourcing and recruitment. And so I, off the top of my head, cannot give you some good places to go, but shoot me an email and I will have her put together a short list and I'll send it to you of some of the places where we've been sending clients when they're saying, hey, just don't know where to go to look for qualified people of color. And stop using that word qualified. I put that in there intentionally so that I could say that, because we don't say we need to go find some qualified white people. We only say it when we're talking about Blacks or women or some other group. Everybody who applies for a job is qualified. Nobody wins by being a token, and don't think that people of color or women want to be the token. We want to be seen for who we are and what we contribute, and we are working hard to contribute. So long answer to your question, but that's just the passion that's coming out.
I understand, and thank you, Dr. Wiley. We got another question in the chat. It's a, they've heard some pushback around having DEI task force rather than engaging the entire organization. And they say, you mentioned your work with IBM. Could you talk about the differences in strategies, the effectiveness of one versus the other?
So a task force really is designed to get the ball rolling. It's not necessarily intended to be something that's going to last for the long term. What some organizations do is they'll start with the task force to start gathering research, coming up with the plan, those kinds of things. And then that task force, or a subset of it in many cases, becomes a diversity council to kind of steer and guide. But many organizations, rather than just bring in a chief diversity officer right off the bat, they put together a team, a committee, a task force to kind of survey and figure out, what are we lacking? What do we need? What's our current state? So they basically are charged with doing a current state analysis and figuring out the future state and what do we need to close the gap. Most organizations don't keep a task force around for a long period of time. They get the ball rolling. They may turn it over to a chief diversity officer, a diversity council, that type of thing, and they are the ones responsible for moving the initiative forward. In terms of effectiveness, I don't have any data to suggest that one is more effective than the other. The important thing is the process. The important thing is asking the right questions, collecting the data, coming up with the plan, and putting the appropriate people in place to implement the plan, continuing to give them education, unconscious bias training, those types of things. So some of that really just depends on your culture. If your culture is a task force culture, that would be the way to go. If not, as long as you have some people in place, whether it's your diversity council and working with the client right now, where they're starting from scratch on this initiative. And they're not going the task force route, they're going the route of putting together a diversity council. So we've given them criteria with who makes good diversity council members, how long should they serve, how do you put together a charter, what should be their objective, all those kinds of things.
Great. Another question. We understand the importance of the 6 main characteristics, right? But what happens when a leader is maybe missing some of those 6 characteristics? How do you encourage a leader or kind of influence a leader to kind of grow to get more of those characteristics?
So that can be part of the individual development plan. I mean, as we know, people do what they get measured on and rewarded for. So you have to hold people accountable. And just as we put other things into an individual development plan, if somebody needs more finance experience to get to the next level, if they need budgeting experience, whatever the case might be, somebody needs a supervisory opportunity, we put things in their plan. We put courses in, whether or not we want to send them to school. Maybe they need to go to an executive MBA program. There are all kinds of things that we do to develop people. This is something else. So we should measure. And in fact, there is, again, if you contact me, we have formed a strategic partnership with a company that actually has an inclusion survey, not a diversity survey, but they measure those 6 things and some others. And they also measure workplace dimensions to understand how inclusive is your culture, how inclusive are your leaders, how inclusive is this individual taking this assessment, because that's really the next step in measurement. So when we come back and find out that somebody needs more curiosity or cultural intelligence, now you can build an individual development plan around those things that are missing. And if they need to take certain assessments, read certain books, do they need a coach? Do they go to certain classes? Do they need to be moved into a lateral temporary assignment to get what they need? Just as you would build up somebody who their technical skills needed help, we need to start paying more attention to people's emotional intelligence and their interpersonal skills.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So basically, you're saying you can basically start your process with a good assessment, and that'll let you know where you are as an organization, and then you can move forward from there.
Yes, and I would strongly suggest, I mean, I know sometimes people feel like consultants are always trying to sell consulting services. I'm not that kind of consultant. Yes, we have good services that we want you to use. My goal is to get you self-sufficient. So I say that first because I want to say that when it comes to assessments, I really believe that you need to get professional help either in developing it for you or developing it with you. Because if you knew, most of the time, if you knew what questions to ask or what to do, you'd be doing it. So stay in your lane of whatever you do. There are people whose lane is devoted to assessments in that area. Let them do what they do. Because otherwise, if you measure the wrong things, you'll be addressing the wrong things and you're not going to get the right results. That's often what happens with diversity training. People will say, well, we did that and it didn't work. No, it's not that it didn't work. You probably didn't do it from the right timing or perspective or content, and you might be measuring something else. Classes can tell you, people will give you an evaluation form, their reaction, whether or not they liked it. You can do pre-tests and post-tests to determine whether or not they learned anything and gained any knowledge. But many times we want to put the people through training and then we want to measure behavior. And an 8-hour class, a 4-hour class, whatever it is not enough to see somebody's behavior shift. So it's not that it didn't work, it's that you gave them apples and expected them to make orange juice. You've got to be measuring what it is that you delivered. And that's where we fall short lots of times.
We probably have time for one more question. So I just grab one of these and we'll probably wrap up after this one. Do companies who make D&I metrics as a part of a leader's winning performance payout see better results for accountability?
There is some data that suggests that. Now you can find that there are some who maybe they're getting good results and there's not, it's not measured in their accountability. But yes, those by and large, those who hold people accountable for the results in that area are showing much better results. For example, you know, when I told you about some of the work that IBM was doing, people were being held accountable for results at IBM, and look at the profitability, $270 million increase in revenue. So yes, I'm a firm believer that there needs to be some measure. Now, again, it doesn't have to be, some people talk about how do you tie it to pay and different things. That's another conversation. That's another workshop. But again, leaders have a lot to do. And part of how their priorities are established is going to be based on what am I measured on? What am I held accountable to? And if you're someone who this does not come naturally for you, you know, many times the people who volunteer to come to programs like this are the ones who are open and willing to learn. And many times the ones who don't show up are the ones who really need to be there. The same thing happens with training. If training is not mandatory, the ones who don't believe in it and don't want to do it are not going to show up. So you need to make it a requirement to show, and you need to put in some milestones that you measure and hold them accountable. That's the way you change behavior.
I do want to get this last question in. I promise you it's the last one, Dr. Wiley.
Right.
But it's a pretty good question. Are there any tools out there that organizations can use to conduct a racial equity audit?
Yes. Well, yes and no. So one of the firms that I think is really good when it comes to measuring all things related to diversity is Hubbard and Hubbard. So a husband and wife team. I think it's Hubbard and Hubbard, or it might be Hubbard and Associates. But if you look them up, they do a lot of good stuff. If you want just to get a general sense of some freebies, there's the Harvard Project has that implicit assumption test, and it's free. You can Google it, just Google Harvard Implicit Assumption Test. It's called the IAT, Implicit Assumption Test. And you can take that based on race, based on gender. You can look at specific groups like Muslims. You can look at, there's all kinds of stuff. It was a project that came out of, you know, some Harvard professors and some professors from other schools all banded together. That's not an audit of your organization, but if people take it, it gives them an idea of what kind of implicit biases or assumptions they're making. Most things that are looking at diversity in my scope are not just looking at a racial audit. That's something that you would contract, except like I said, Hubbard, I know about them, or you would contract an organization. Like, let's say if Turning Point Leadership Group, if we're already in there doing work for you, or you're looking for us to come in and do training, we would put together our own racial audit if we felt that was necessary to do that. But it depends on what it is that you're looking for when you say a racial audit, because the numbers, all you have to do is go through your HR system. You'll see what the numbers are. If you want to find out what people's attitudes are about race, then you can do something like the IAT, or get Hubbard or Turning Point or someone to come in and do some sort of measurement for you. But in terms of tools that are out there, there are some, none that I've used to be able to feel comfortable recommending them to you. But I do feel comfortable telling you to call Hubbard and Hubbard.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Wiley, for joining us. I'm sure I'll be reaching out again to dig deeper into some more situations as Diversified 2021 is coming up as well. We need to talk about that. But yes, I want to thank our sponsor again, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. This video will be available probably tomorrow on our website. So go to the Chamber's website, ChattanoogaChamber.com/diversified to see all of our DEI videos, including Diversified 2020 as well. So with that being said, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Wiley, and we'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Thanks so much.